I've really enjoyed working with these two companies over the last month or so, putting together this keynote discussion all around automation. It's going to be really insightful, led by David. I'm really excited for this. So I won't spoil it the next slide, but if I'd like to welcome onto the stage David, Steve, Knut, and James from TAAP, Leapwork, and London Tech Leaders.
Good evening, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm the David that you're getting double of. It's not necessarily a good thing. Oh, I'm going. Sorry. I take your space.
It's not an intimidating room at all, is it?
Yeah.
I'll just close my eyes, shall I?
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have a little chat from Steve, tell us a bit about his world. And then James is going to tell us a little bit about Leapworks and the work that they do. And then we're going to have a bit of a chat between Knut and Steve to see if we can unpick some of this low-code, no-code nonsense, strategic stuff. All right, Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, hopefully, if we can move the slide forward, that'd be very good. Right, so a little bit of background while I'm talking. So I'm Steve Higgon, I'm CEO and founder of TAAP. We're an accelerated application development platform that actually is using, in quotes, no code to build applications quickly. The challenge, I guess, for most people is actually they've not really heard of no code and they've not really sure about actually what the business benefits are that this can actually then deliver. So we've been doing this as a process or a business since 2004. And to set the scene, obviously, the last 50 years has all been around implementation. How do we implement and write software? The challenge, which has actually been obviously a big challenge, is how many different programming languages are there that we've actually then had to then deal with? All the different versions of it, the different versions of the operating systems, and actually how we go through the process of actually then testing all of that. I think the American Department of Defense at one point actually talked about 450 different languages that were being used across the estate of projects it was working on. And the challenge was that every one of those languages were actually then changing, or different versions, different frameworks that were being used. So again, it's amazing actually software works at all with all these different kind of challenges that we're actually then having to deal with. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is actually then talking to the end users who are actually then trying to explain to the developers what they want. And that again is then also a disjoint process where actually the developers are being asked to actually then build a solution that actually the end users are trying to describe in a document that actually neither are completely happy with. The end user being asked to then sign that document off for the developer to build. The end user not actually understanding what that document is. And then when the developer starts it, they start guessing at some kind of implementation issues. And then neither's happy at the end of it when the software is delivered. So the challenge from the software industry is that's been the process for the last 50 years. And really what we've been approaching the kind of the challenge with is a technology that's a platform that allows you to build applications, to build them very quickly, to abstract the language that you're using from a programming point of view so that actually you don't have to be a rocket scientist to build the application. You can build these applications, eliminate maintenance, reduce the technical debt, and actually allow you to do a lot more, effectively democratizing the way that software can actually then be delivered. What you can see behind me at the moment on the videos are actually examples of the way that applications are then being shaped and created using this technology. The video in the bottom left-hand corner there was an application that was actually used in the energy sector with 6 consultants describing what they wanted. This was a 3-hour conversation. 3.5 hours later, they had the application in their hands, allowing them to interact with it. At which point they suddenly remembered all the things that they should have actually mentioned during that 3-hour conversation. 4 hours later, the whole thing was built. So now they're actually then running an application that was then deployed globally by business analysts, not technical developers. Now, we're not saying that actually we're anti-developer. The point is this is about allowing more people to get involved in the development process, freeing up developers to be able to do more complicated tasks. So the purpose of this technology is effectively democratizing and changing the way that actually people can operate and build software applications. The other examples that I've got here in terms of use cases are examples where we've actually been building solutions for people like Tesco, as an example. They needed a solution for food surplus. You may have seen they were kind of donating a lot of their kind of surplus food. The chief exec wanted that solution built in 6 weeks. The IT teams couldn't do it for 18 months and then weren't sure when it was going to be delivered. We got the first application up and running in 3 days. It was fully integrated into their internal systems within 3 weeks and was then donating 50 million meals a year to charity. The thing about that was actually built by one person. And so the whole point about this technology is it's simplifying the process of building applications. It's allowing you to do more, faster, quicker, and actually build this in a way that actually you can then maintain it and run it for as long as you like without maintenance. That's just an example of actually how this technology is being used for the retail sector. For the NHS, we had a situation where a government and digital exemplar hospital, which is meant to be the best of the best, there's 15 of them in the country, actually had a patient discharge system that was basically run on Excel. The chief exec saw this technology and basically became a champion for the way in which you could actually then deliver and change the way an organisation worked. And over the period of 3 weeks, we were able to actually then create the application shaped by the doctors and nurses, so they were effectively the front-end people, and then we took the hospital live once they'd actually then gone through the process of signing off what they wanted in 4 weeks from initial conversation to live. So this is allowing organisations to now do more, faster, quicker, and then run these applications without all the usual traditional maintenance and maintenance overhead. And part of obviously what we're going to be doing through the debate and the conversation here is expanding out upon that. So again, unless there's any initial particular questions that anyone's got, I'll hand it back to David. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We'll have time to ask Steve. Yeah, by all means, give him a clap. So we're going to move straight over to James, who's going to talk to us about Leapworks and what they've been doing.
Wonderful, thank you. So I guess the other perspective of the application development is actually what do you do when you test it, right? So I'm going to talk firstly about a very well-known name in the testing industry, which is NASA. Not at all, but I thought I'd kind of pique everyone's interest. So in 1957, I've written this down because I did some research this morning. In 1957, Charles Baker was one of the first people to write about program testing. In 1958, Gerald Weinberg was the first person, actually the project lead for software delivery on Mercury. Now, Mercury was the first manned US mission to space. And then in 1979, Glenford Myers wrote a book about the art of software testing. I mention this because NASA was one of our first customers. Didn't know this until today about the history. And then you fast forward kind of 25 years and you look at programs like Selenium. Hands up who's heard of Selenium in the past? Yeah, great. So Selenium was really one of the, I guess, the best known coding-based software test automation, which is the space that Leapwork are in. And I think if we fast forward, to today, the title where, we talk about innovation meets simplicity, I guess a lot of people are probably pretty skeptical, right? But if we look at is no code and low code really hype? I guess the answer is yes and also no at the same time. There's 432 companies in our space that talk about no code and low code. And when we look at code-based solutions, we know that you can do anything with code-based test automation solutions, but they require very technically skilled individuals, probably a vast proportion of this room. It's typically quite siloed within IT. And as the pace of technology has exploded, that pool has become smaller and smaller and smaller. So if we look at the kind of 432 companies that are in this space, what we tend to find, and this is, I guess, prevalent in a lot of other technology areas too, is that a lot of these systems are still very technical, but with a really nice UI on top of them to try and attract more business-focused people, less technically skilled people. But I think that when we get to things like depth and complexity, more often than not, you get straight back to the thing that we were trying to avoid in the first place, which is code. So if we look at the approach that we have, and maybe you can just click to the next slide, thank you. We've landed on what is a language that everybody in this room would understand. And where we landed was a visual-based approach, right? And I guess everybody, whether you know Leapwork, whether you don't, you can all look at this, this test flow here and actually understand what's happening in the test flow. And it's the analogy we always like to use is, I don't speak Spanish, but I can go to Spain today and jump in a car and drive right throughout Spain. I can't speak Spanish, but I understand the road signs. And that's exactly the way that we've built Leapwork, so that hopefully we can bring in more and more people that businesses actually have, which are business-focused people who understand what the software is ultimately trying to do. If you go to the last slide, there's many customers. NASA, was one of our first when we were founded 10 years ago. But there's many customers that have gone on this journey, which is essentially how do we use the people that we already have to build, better quality software. So yeah, that's it from me. So thank you.
That's brilliant. Let's give James a round of applause.
And I hate doing these things in case anybody didn't realise. So there you go.
Excellent. Well done. Thank you, James. Okay, so we've now got Knut and Steve. Now, this was billed, for those of you paying attention to your social media, as a bit of a boxing match. And when Luke told me about this, I was like, this is great. I'm going to have two heavyweights on either side of me, and I'm going to be the referee. Turns out that's not how this boxing match is going to work. I'm the dumb representative who doesn't trust low code, no code, or test automation. I'm representing that view. So I'm the antagonist in this. So it's me who's getting beaten up. But hopefully that will be of some benefit to you, because I'll ask those questions, which I'm sure some of you are interested to know the answers to. All right, so we're going to start with you, Steve. Okay, so a little bit flippant, but if we can fully implement full functional enterprise scale applications in less than 60 seconds, you said 3 hours, but let's say 60 seconds, what does the future of applications development actually look like? Does it exist anymore?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so the process that you're talking about is an AI app builder that we've generated as part of the TAAP technology. That allows you to then effectively take a specification, a high-level specification, a machine generate in less than 60 seconds, a full enterprise scale application. It will then publish that to a cloud, generate the database, and allow you to log in. And the whole point about this is actually that it's not about actually then getting rid of actually developers. It's about allowing organizations to actually digitize more and actually then elevate actually the way in which we actually build solutions, so that actually we're delivering far more value quicker. Now, historically, the challenge has obviously then been, if I come up with an idea and I then talk to the IT teams, they've normally got a backlog of work. They can't actually get around to doing it. And actually, when they do get around to doing it, I've probably lost interest in and got another idea. The other problem is it's the amount of money that it takes to actually then build a solution or create a pilot. Well, now we've got to the point where actually we can almost run ideas. The effort now has actually moved the emphasis from implementation to design. And that's actually going to give us the ability to actually then digitize not just what we can afford in an organization, but actually every single process that an organization decides they want to digitize.
But that did sound a little bit like the engineers are not going to be so important. Is that the case?
No, not at all, because there's a concept that actually Gartner came up with. I know you're a fan of Gartner, which talks about citizen development, basically turning everyone into a developer. Why would we do this? If we can actually then give the developers actually tooling that allows them to actually operate at the pace that we can now with this technology, it means we can leverage their skills and their understanding of actually how IT should function and how it can scale, how we can integrate it into AI more effectively, which means they can do more quickly at a pace that actually they've not been able to previously. So what it's really doing is allowing IT and the business to work better together to actually then deliver more value for the enterprise.
Okay, I'm nearly there. I'm going to come back to that developer bit in a minute. Knut, let's ask you. Sorry. Let's go that way, this way, pass down. It's all perfectly organised. So automation, right? Test automation. I've been a CTO for a long time. We've been using this for, everybody knows, all our audience know what test automation is. It's great. Why are we making a song and dance about this now? Why is there a new wave of test automation coming on, and why is that important?
Yeah. So if I take one step back and I think about the importance of something, maybe it's best abstracted through how wide the user group is, right? How many companies are using this? And I took a look at this morning. So we had a chat, and we have now roughly nearly 400 enterprise customers. And we recently did a survey where we asked, when was the right time for you to do automation? And what came out of this was the majority of the companies told us that 3 to 5 years ago, some even 12 months ago, said they wouldn't have done automation at that point. So that means for us, there's something that has changed. And I wish to say it was all, Leapwork technology and our beautiful visual interface. I think it's much more about the changes that we see in the industry, essentially external forces, and I'll come to that quickly. But the big one that we're seeing, and I'll give an example. So the importance of software, the volume of software, and the criticality of software for most companies is pivoting. I sat down with Schmitz Cargill. They're a truck company. They've been around since 1890. All they've done is, steel production and putting it together to truck and selling it. 2 years ago, they pivoted their strategy to start putting sensors, telematics at their trucks, creating a meter data management, pushing that into 6 different applications, and trying actually to create a software business. And that's when they called up Leapwork and said, suddenly software is integral to our operations and we need to think about testing. So that's one element. I think probably the more important one is the frequency we're seeing and the rate at which releases are becoming mandatory. So if you think about the move from the waterfall approach to an agile approach, combined with the fact that we're moving to SaaS, you're increasingly probably facing that you're getting releases pushed your way with much higher frequency and you can't choose them anymore. And I'll give a great example, right? Microsoft, we're seeing now 12 proactive quality updates a year, 4 service updates, and you effectively have 21 days from these softwares are being released until you're auto-updated, whether you want it or not. And the reality then is, if you're anything like the 40 Microsoft customers that joined us the last 6 months, that 21 days, if you have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 test cases in your regression pack, you're down to 50, 60, sometimes 100 people involved in regression in those 21 days. I think that's the biggest change that we're seeing, that is no longer something that it would be nice to have. It starts to become a real requirement.
So I kind of get that. I think that possibly, hands up those who have been using test automation in the last 5 years. Okay. Hands up those of you who have been using test automation in the last 5 years because you innovated and decided it was a good thing to do and saw the benefits. Go on. Versus some of the point that Knut is making, which is it became a bit more essential, right? Speed of release, like the whole DevOps revolution has led us to a point where, we're releasing multiple times a day. You just can't do the manual aspect of that testing to keep up with that, right? So there's an imperative is what you're saying.
Yeah, and when with that move to SaaS, right? I sat down with Baringa, they just went for our solution, and they were saying like 12 months ago, it wasn't relevant. But now, the moment we're in Microsoft, we're having these 14 to 16 releases where we don't have a choice. And I don't see a way around either hiring 5, 10, 15 people that would be dedicated to this, outsource it to an external T&M provider that will do it like an Expli or a Qualitest, or I need to get an in-house tool that could enable me to do it.
Okay.
And that's the options.
Okay. All right. I like that. It sounds like we need to just revisit whether there's some more use cases that we might have for automation rather than some that we tuned into 4 or 5 years ago. It sounds like it's worth a revisit for CTOs and CIOs. Right. Back to you. Citizen developers, why do we need them if everything's going to be done by a couple of really clever developers and lots of low-code, no-code platforms?
We don't.
Thanks very much. Come on, we've got a lot of developers out there, right?
Yeah.
We need all this talent, don't we? I mean, we haven't got enough talent in technology and people who know how to develop code, have we?
No, we haven't. And that's part of the I suppose, the challenge is that, in my opinion, citizen development came about as effectively a stopgap because of the fact that actually IT was so backlogged up, they couldn't get any work done. The business needed to move forward. So therefore, let's train the business to actually become programmers. The problem is that there's obviously a huge amount, obviously, in terms of actually building an application. And the problem is that actually you build the app, you're all enthusiastic about it as a citizen developer, and then suddenly you end up, what do you mean I've got to maintain it and support it? I've got a day job, I've got my other stuff to do. And then suddenly what you've got is now chaos. So the problem is that a lot of organizations that have started to embrace the citizen developer model actually have then backed out of it because then they've suddenly realized they've turned the whole business into operating as part of IT. So obviously the benefit of the technologies that we've now got where actually we're able to then deliver faster, quicker using professional developers means that actually the developers can actually then focus on delivering the value quicker and faster. The business can focus on actually on the business function, and it works in a much more effective way together. Now, these kind of Gartner fusion teams, as they call them, mean that actually then the business and IT work closer together, which actually then means that rather than being months or even years to build an application, you're now actually then working a much higher cadence rate with actually DevOps integrated into platforms, allowing you to do more faster and at a pace that actually you've not been able to previously. So it allows the developers to actually really shine.
All right, now I'm really confused because James said that if we used a visual technique, anybody could get involved. Now you're saying we don't need anybody to get involved. So Knut, what are we doing here, right? We seem to be using low-code, no-code tools, automation to unlock the ability for non-technical users, business users, to be able to get involved earlier on in the design, in the automation, check stuff out, check it works for the business. I mean, I've met some of these business users. They're not the sharpest. Is that a good idea? Is that the right thing to do?
It's a really interesting question. How much time do I have?
You've got about a minute and a half.
Okay. So I think the doing this with non-technical people is a solution to a problem. So what's the problem, right? I mean, it's a great idea, but I think, I sat down with the CIO of Schwartz IT, right? Schwartz Group, the third largest retailer in the world, and he told me in very simple terms, right? The problem we're trying to solve is we're trying to get the maximum amount of quality. So I want as few phone calls as possible from people that are, frankly annoyed that my software is down, to the minimum cost. Right? That's the problem statement. And they'd tried it all. So they tried one version where you essentially run the more Selenium-based technical central team that on behalf of the business will try to write scripts. And then there's a bit of a ping pong game and you try to get it right. And then the automation is done that way. And over the last 3 years, they pivoted to this, you call it, so citizen developers, like almost like a citizens QA model, if I could coin that now.
You just have.
Yeah, exactly. And in that way, they would essentially push the responsibility of a lot of the QA work that was done centrally into the business. So with this model, and we had a longer conversation, but the net of it was that because you had much more people who woke up and thought about quality, and because you could push, people who led a application or a business unit to actually be measured on quality, because you'd given them a tool where they could do that work themselves, you got more quality out of the people for less money. And the money part came down to that if you had to hire that large group of technical people to do the job, you typically had to outsource a big part of it. There had to be developer type skill sets surrounded around like a Selenium or a Ranorex or even a Tosca Tricentis. And it became very expensive on the organizational cost, meaning the people you needed, the ramp type they needed. And that's how they managed to get the most, like currently they're running 150 business users with Leapwork. That's how they managed to get the most money,
And you've got people who understand your business. Right?
Yes.
Rather than a third party who are just clicking buttons and sending you bugs, right?
Yeah, and if you take that point, what that would mean is that what typically happens if you run this translation ping pong game is that you end up testing what we call the vanilla flow. Essentially you don't do the edge cases, you don't do the variation. A business users that understand the application, the business processes would actually start thinking about, I don't want to just test orders received. I want to test, or goods received. I want to test goods received, but there's a variation on the downside and the upside. And suddenly you got those 10 different variations that a technical team loses in the translation between a business person and a technical person. If that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. I'm starting to be converted. It makes me think I need to go back to my desk and have a rethink about whether or not low-code, no-code has a purpose in my business. I need to relook at my test automation strategy, see whether there's more advancement I can make there. And going to have to swallow that one and engage the business users a little bit more and get them a bit more involved in what it is that we're building to see if that moves the company forward. I'm okay with that. I can just about manage that. You've converted me. Well done, Steve. It was a hard task. We're a little bit tight on time. We're going to carry on some aspects of this conversation. I imagine there's some questions that the audience have about this. We're going to carry that into the panel session with a couple of the questions we've asked there. So I'm going to skip questions for now, if that's okay. Oh, okay. We've got time for one question. Anybody want to ask a question to these guys? Sure.
Great stuff, guys, but how do you do supply chain integrity and all this?
Who wants to take that?
it doesn't actually change the way that you actually go about engineering a system. It just means you can do it faster. This isn't about actually then saying that you don't need to then take the expertise that everyone in this room's got. It just means that actually once you've understood what the problem is, you can do it faster without focusing on the implementation. So it's not about actually then changing integrity. I mean, we're building applications that are business and mission critical for organizations at all levels. So it doesn't change that from that perspective, unless I've kind of misunderstood your question. Okay.
Let's give him another go. Re-clarify, please.
Supply chain integrity is about attesting all the software you pull into your organization. This low code works on the principle that most application development nowadays is only 5 to 10% original code, and the rest of it is libraries. You're effectively writing logic on top of imported functionality. You need to know where that functionality came from. Even if it's AI generated, it's based on something. Supply chain integrity is about knowing where that came from, which version it was, tracking known vulnerabilities and CVEs in all the stuff you import. It's hard enough in a normal development context. My question is how you do this in an AI development context.
Yeah, because it's not actually about relying on libraries of actually pre-existing code and versions. This technology is allowing you to actually then move the emphasis from implementation to specification. So you can then define precisely what you want, the way you want it, finite state machines, whatever way you want to actually then look at the data, and it builds that for you in a high-level, no-code language that you can then maintain, version, and look at. So you get the full integrity end-to-end.
But I think there is sorry, I'm coming back this way now. There is a point to that in which I suppose, when we moved to the open source world a few years ago, there was, CEOs were going, well, who made it? Where's it come from? What's the maintenance of it? Who's doing version control? What's the defect? And I suppose this is an evolution of that to a certain extent, right? So, I would be asked by my CEO about that sort of thing. So I wonder if we're going to have to get some kind of open source. We've all got very comfortable with open source now. I wonder if we're going to have some kind of framework which supports that going forward.
Well, this particular technology with TAAP actually generates open source. So you can see everything, you can understand it, you can maintain it, you can then run it for as long as you like. So the point is, this isn't generating effectively gobbledygook that you can't understand or maintain. This allows you to actually then, from a very high level specification, build and create the solutions that you want with actually the integrity that you need, the way that you need it. So this isn't about effectively trying to then demystify it. It's about just simply collapsing the time it takes to do the work that you would have traditionally done.
Okay, cool. Hopefully that helps. We've got time for a couple more questions, apparently. Gentleman over there, waving his hand wildly. He's very enthusiastic, clearly.
Thanks. So on the low code side of things, how do you sell the value? So you'll have a license cost for your software. Okay, so what aspects do you talk to your customer about selling the value from a cost point of view and time point of view? So I'm looking for metrics. Yeah, so I'm looking for metrics and elements you're
So in terms of the TAAP model, as an example, so we've kind of come to this at a very low cost model so that actually organizations are effectively not hindered by actually the cost of building software. There's no limit on the number of processes. There's actually a cap on actually the amount of money that you spend actually on users. So the objective is that actually we're not trying to get in the way of you building and digitizing as many processes as you like. And where we've then got partners that are actually building products is low enough that they can actually add their own IP and their own value on top of it. So the objective is that by the end of the process of actually building an application and digitizing the enterprise, you're paying a fraction of actually the cost of that you would have gone through building solutions ordinarily.
So follow up, if I may. Sorry. So do you have something that's crude enough as a calculator, or do you have metrics that would go into that use case, business case?
Yes, we do. We have a very clear calculator. It's a published pricing model. It's been the same price since 2004. So our model is all about volume and scale on a global basis. I'm happy to kind of take that as a sidebar conversation. Brilliant. If you like.
Thanks.
Excellent. One more question. Gentleman just behind you.
All right. Hi, thank you very much. This was very interesting. Quick question regarding the low-code revolution in terms of where is the limit between what is acceptable through what can be done through low-code versus what can be done through more skilled developers? Where do you set that line? Because that's what is really, where do you? Yeah, that's the question basically. Is there such a... Yeah.
Sure.
I think increasingly what we see is, at least like put AI aside, which would help solve some of the more complex things around building and maintaining possibly. The typical model that we see is a center of excellence model where you would have still some super users, and some of that includes developer skills, which would still do, I would say, 20 to 30% of the testing. And a lot of what they would do is also be building reusable blocks, reusable tests that can be packaged up. And, if you saw the building blocks that we're using packaged up and then be used by the business. So I think the model would be, whereas in a typical test cycle, if you had more of a tech-oriented tool at the center, you'd look at running nearly 100% in a centralized team. You'd here try to distribute somewhere between 60 to 80% out to applications or business users, and the more complex parts of what you needed to do still needed to be governed, maintained, controlled, and also built by a central team. Does that help?
Where I'm getting at is more when it comes to developing an application. So if I do Google Forms, something very basic, then I can see how no-code is your solution, because the actual coding behind it is very basic and can be emulated through a visual kind of interface. Now, when it comes to more complex coding, then there is a point where that approach fails, or is not, it becomes actually too simplistic and creates, in fact, complexity, because you try to work around using your basic tools and your basic components. You end up doing something that ends up being really bad code, okay? Because that's where a good coder will find simplicity in the complexity. So the question is, when you promote low code, do you define some kind of domain, functional domain, where it is applicable versus some others where it's not? And how do you define that domain?
Understood. So we started this back in 2004. Prior to that, we were actually looking at other kind of low-code type technologies, unimpressed. Prior to setting up TAAP, my background was in space and defense, so developing distributed real-time applications that had to degrade, not fail, so kind of enterprise scale type solutions. So when we actually built the platform, what we created was an enterprise architecture that allowed you to be able to then build whatever you needed to, because the most depressing thing that I found as a developer when I was using these tools was I'd get to a certain point of actually the development cycle, can't do it anymore. And it was a black box. I couldn't easily extend it. So the whole point about the technology that we've created particularly is that it's enterprise scale. It can sit on elastic compute, it can sit on elastic data, it can sit behind message queuing, it can sit on serverless technology, it can sit offline on iOS, Android, and Windows. And as a developer, you don't need to be caring about the underlying operating system, because we've actually taken care of that for you. It doesn't mean that actually there aren't certain applications, very extreme applications, that might require very specific capabilities. So, for example, we did some work for a caravan company where they actually wanted to embed special Bluetooth device drivers into an iOS application. So we were able to add that in for a customer. But we've not found anything yet that actually we haven't been able to then implement in a no-code. I'll be very clear about that, no-code technology. So there's actually no code in the platform. And the idea of this is actually then it allows you to then focus actually on what the problem space is. And I don't have to worry about what version of iOS, what target device, what the operating system, and how long I can run it for. So this is a very different approach to actually what you may have seen actually as a kind of a low-code technology or no-code, where it's a glorified step up using JavaScript and programming. And actually there are certain limitations or constraints. This is kind of moved kind of to a level beyond that. And the platform we created was actually also being used as a target for allowing AI to generate output applications. So again, happy again to go into more detail for you, but it's not just simply about kind of taking a kind of limited capability or functionality. You can actually build almost anything that you need to. The only thing that we've not focused on is games.
That's great. Hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, it does.
All right, let's give Steve, Knut, and James a round of applause, please.